Activate Australia is pleased to present podcast number 3 in our current series. During the recent Joe Berry Award finals, Laura Moller, Senior Digital Analyst with Coles Group, presented some very interesting points on digital access for disabled people. Laura posed some many questions on cohesiveness and content. To expand on those cohesiveness questions, we've invited 2015 Joe Berry Award winner Sarah Hughes, who is the Wholesale Business Manager for Aesop. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Keith.
Thanks, Keith.
So, Laura, it's wonderful to have this opportunity to have, I guess, a conversation today. So, I guess my first question is, with the Joe Berry Award this year, you had the opportunity to write on a freestyle topic. And so what inspired you to write and present on the potential issues that can arise from a lack of digital access for people with disabilities?
Sure thing. So I was actually really excited to see that there was a freestyle option because it meant I could talk about a topic which I am really passionate about, digital accessibility. And this is an area that I actually do work in day to day. And basically what it is, it's about making sure that websites, apps, anything digital, that can be used by people with disabilities. So it was really a good opportunity to then be able to talk to some of these senior retailers about the importance of making their digital assets accessible and online shopping in retail. So I myself do have lived experience of disability. I have bipolar disorder, which I mentioned, but I actually had a passion for digital accessibility before my diagnosis. And the reason why is I actually learned about digital accessibility when I was working at NAB. And it just struck me that it is really important that people can have access to these online assets, because it's really basically enabling and empowering for people. I think that's the key thing, that when you have websites or apps that aren't accessible, that is something that's going to disable people. Cool.
Yeah, I think you raised a really important point, and I think what was very stark in your presentation is that the retail industry scored 0% when it came to meeting all the standards of employee and customer facing digital accessibility. So why do you think this is still missing for an industry that is obviously very mature and very big?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I'm lucky enough to work in like a team of digital accessibility analysts, but that isn't very common across organizations. I know a lot of big organizations where they might only have 1, maybe 2 people who specialize in digital accessibility. And you can imagine that makes it really hard to then spread to everyone in the organization. And I'll talk to it a bit later, but there are some ways that you can make sure that accessibility is a shared responsibility, and that actually makes it easier to implement. I think the other side is not everyone will understand the importance of it. So even for myself, I didn't learn what digital accessibility was or what it meant until I think it was 2018. So not that long ago. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of organizations who they might have heard of it, but they're not really sure why it's important for their organization.
And I note too that often companies might choose to focus on customer facing digital assets, but don't actually consider potentially internal employee facing ones. So I guess I'm interested in your view on that, and I guess how they can do better in that space.
That's a very good point. So often when you're thinking about digital accessibility, you might be thinking about the customers who have a disability, rather than realizing that with 20% of people having a disability, there will be people within your organization who do also have disability. And if they are running up against problems within your organization, unless they absolutely have to they may not be speaking up about those issues. It could be everyday software that you use. So I think there's a real opportunity there to make sure that whatever software you're already using or new software that you're buying, to also make sure that that's accessible.
And in terms of your view, who do you think really needs to take the lead on improving this digital accessibility in retail companies, and how can it best be done?
Yeah, so I think it should be everybody's responsibility for accessibility. If you have just one person or a couple, especially even if it's digital accessibility analysts, it doesn't work very well. So what's better is if it's a small part of everybody's role and everybody has things that they need to do to contribute towards accessibility. So I'll give you an example, because we work in agile software development, and one of the teams I work with is the Coles app. So we have designers, we have business analysts, we have developers, and we have testers. And for each of those roles, they have something to do for accessibility. So the designer will make sure when they're designing it, it has good color contrast, so it's easy to see, and a whole lot of other things. The business analyst will actually write up specific accessibility requirements, things like it'll work with the screen reader software and how that will work for somebody who's blind. And then the developer, they'll build it and they'll test with the specific, it's called assistive technology, which is kind of technology that can help people with disabilities. And a tester will then go back and check what the developer has done and check those accessibility things as well. So it kind of flows through the whole process. And that makes it, yeah, much, much easier. But I think the other important thing is it's really good to have someone from a high level speaking and advocating for digital accessibility in the organization. Otherwise, I think it can get a little bit lost. And if you have someone higher up, they can help drive the direction. And if it needs funding, if it needs support in terms of the business support, all of those sort of things.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more. And I think that's where the audience through the Joe Berry has been so important, because in terms of the judging panel, you had very senior industry leaders there who, of course, were listening intently to what you were suggesting, and equally this very important segment of the market that needs to be considered. And so I think, yeah, you raise a really fantastic point, and that is that you need strong leadership to really drive this agenda. So yeah, I'm super pleased you had that opportunity through the Joe Berry to do so, and I guess create some really good conversation starters.
Me too.
Yeah, no, brilliant stuff. And then in terms of the references you made around accessibility, so people who might be vision impaired or low vision, is it necessary that all of these areas are included in websites, or is there a more specific target, I guess?
I'm going to say it's actually a more diverse target than that, because when we think about disability, that is a really broad topic, and it covers everything from like sensory disability, which is hearing and sight, things like physical disabilities. There's also mental illness or cognitive disability, and even neurodiversity, so being autistic or having a speech disability as well. So the scale is much more broad than just blindness and low vision as well. But the way that I focus on accessibility when I'm doing it, you look from each kind of perspective and consider like how that might affect the design or how you're building something. So you might start off thinking, okay, as someone who's blind, what sort of things do I need with this digital screen to make it work? And then continue on with the other disability types. Yeah, so yeah, it kind of leads in. We have these guidelines called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and that's an international standard. It's constantly being reviewed and looked at there's a new version due to be released, I think, later this year, which will be WCAG Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.2. So it's always a matter of continuing improvement, because technology isn't something that's static, it's always changing. So accessibility needs to keep alongside it as well.
Absolutely. And I think on that theme of continuous improvement, are there, in your mind, any standout companies that are doing really good things in this space? And who would that be?
Yeah, so two interesting ones are both Microsoft and Apple. I'll chat to you a little bit about some of the new things that I saw Apple is bringing out in terms of accessibility. But the key thing that they both do is they sort of embed accessibility improvements into part of their everyday development. And that's what really makes a difference in the company. So for Apple, one of the first things is, you know how they have some accessibility features on their Apple Watch? Now they have the ability to actually replicate the watch on an iPhone screen. And that's in case you have a physical disability. So you might not be able to tap or do the right gestures, but you can have like that version on your iPhone now, and you can interact with it however you normally would on your iPhone, which might be a voice control, or it might be, there's something called a switch button, which is like a larger button that makes it easier to physically touch for people with physical disabilities. So more people will actually be able to access that, which I thought was really cool. And there's some new technology that's come in with video recognition. So this is something called like doorway detection, which I'd never heard of, but it's not come out yet either. So people who are blind or vision impaired, when they're coming up to a doorway, they'll be able to hold their phone up with the video, and it'll tell them if it's open or if it's closed. It'll also read any text and even tell them like where the handle is located and what kind, if it tells them push or pull, which is really quite cool, I thought.
Yeah, very. No, I think that's wonderful, and would obviously be very important and very empowering for people who rely on that technology. That's wonderful to hear. And Laura, do you, I guess, see yourself as a spokesperson for this disability relationship in terms of the relationship with the industry? And if so, how will you make your message even louder and clearer?
I do always want to be mindful that I can only represent from my experience as someone with a disability. It'll be very different to someone, even if they have the same disability type as me. So I do always want to keep that in mind, but it's something I'm very passionate about, and I'm keen to break down some of the stigma, particularly around mental illness, which was partly why I decided to join and create Coles' first employee disability network. So that was a really cool initiative to work on, and I'm co-chair of that, which helps to kind of highlight the voices and stories of different people with disability in Coles.
If I'm not mistaken, you and the team won some awards, didn't you, in recognition of that?
Yeah, we did win the Website Access Award, as well as getting a finalist for the Coles app from the Australian Access Awards recently. So it has really come a long way at Coles.
Yeah, definitely.
From back when we got sued in 2014 to having that same person like nominate us, and then we won that 2 years in a row.
Yeah, no, absolutely amazing. And I think, incredibly important, to be honest, to recognise as a retailer customer behaviour and the need to service every type of customer. It's ultimately the goal of retail, and doing so in an inclusive way. So, Laura, I think we're almost at our final question. So having had the experience of Joe Berry this year, the essay writing and then the finals and presentation to the judges, will you be back with a new message to deliver in 2023?
I think it'll depend a bit if there's a freestyle topic. Otherwise, I'll be looking at what the new topics are. But if there was a freestyle topic next year, one area I'd really be interested in looking at is about the employment of people with disabilities in retail, and how, like, as an industry, we can retain and also hire more disabled talent. Yeah, I think historically people with disabilities have had low employment rates compared to people without disability. So it would be really interesting to look into, like, what are some of the barriers in our current retail organizations, and what could we do to change that pattern?
I was interested while you were talking, Laura, that we tended to be looking at internet and accessibility through websites and online shopping and those sorts of things. And the thought occurred to me that a lot of us have disability or not, have problems with telephone systems where they will have a voice come over that says to you, please say what you want to attend to. And of course, that's fine if you've got the ability to do that, or often enough it's not fine because it doesn't work.
Yes.
But is there a similar situation that applies to telephones as it does to the internet systems?
I think it comes down to always just having different options that people can use. Like, don't necessarily, like, if you wanted to get support, for example, from a service, you're not locked into having to call someone on the phone. Like, maybe you have a web chat, or maybe you have an email or a text. I think having different options is really important, because there'll be some people who aren't able to talk through the phone. And yeah, because maybe they have, like, a speech disability. I also find those systems really frustrating to try and get through. They're a bit of a nightmare. Yeah. The
Activate group is putting together now, as you're probably aware, the second edition of the industry report. That in itself is a pretty good platform for messages to be put out. And we would like to add more about this disability proposition into those reports. Who do we need to target? Where should we be aiming versions of or editions of this report so that we're getting your message further and further into the industry?
I think what I was chatting with Sarah before about getting that opportunity to speak with senior leaders was really critical, because I do think it comes from the top down. Generally, it's good to have advocates everywhere, of course, but if I was going to say where to aim it, that's where I would be, from managers and up across all industries.
There's no doubt that the issue that you've raised, certainly through the Joe Berry Award and the reactions we saw, Laura, from the judging panel on the day, were very, very significant. And you've had impact, I think, well beyond what you may even realise at the moment. So we're very, very appreciative of you taking the time and coming and repeating the message that you have, and to you, Sarah, for posing those questions to Laura, certainly with your experience in retail levels as well. So thank you both very, very much for being part of this podcast, and I'm sure both of you will be using your talents again in the not too distant future. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith.
Thanks, Keith.